anytime you're in a situation where you're not feeling valued, you need to find a place where you are. You can't let others just define your self-worth. You have to believe in yourself. And if you're not in a working situation where that's happening for you, you need to find an outlet where you can find that again.
There's a key to my front door. You got a pillow if you lost yours. You got a seat at my table. You got a here's somebody who believes you. Let truth remind you. You've always got a place to go to. You got a home.
Welcome to The Creator's Journey. I'm your host, Charles Gupton. Fears and obstacles on the journey of creation are things we all face. Every creator who works from the heart faces the same challenges. You're not alone. In each episode, I talk with creative leaders about the mindsets and processes they use to push through their struggles to create and put their work out into the world in order to make a difference. Thanks for joining me on this journey.
Here's the key to my front door. You got a pillow if you lost yours. You got a seat at my table. You got a home. Here's somebody who believes you. Let truth remind you. You've always got a place to go to. You got a home.
Laurel Stark is a self-proclaimed word nerd. She's worked as a copywriter, both on staff and as a contract creative director for more than a dozen companies and ad agencies. But she's more than just a wordsmith. At heart, Laurel is a very strategic storyteller who considers overall design and the user's experience in everything she creates or collaborates on. I first encountered Laurel's leadership watching a video of a panel discussion she was co-facilitating at the 2015 3% conference called The Next Creative Leaders. As I did a little digging into Laurel's work, I was intrigued by a number of things that I want to explore in our conversation today. Welcome, Laurel.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Let's jump into our time together by going way back to your childhood.
Sure.
You've said you were born without a family, that you were given up for adoption.
Yep.
Tell me about that and the impact it's had on your desire to build connection and community.
Yeah, I am adopted. I was adopted at birth, and I actually got to meet both of my biological parents when I was 8 years old. So that whole thinking a lot about the relationships we have and how different relationships can be and what kind of relationships you can have with people, that's been something that I've been thinking a lot about basically my whole life, because my adoption was always something that my parents were open with me about. So, just going through the process of creating family ties and rethinking what family means at a young age, that really kind of influenced the way that I look at the world and the way that I look at people and the way that I can connect with them. So, I love people and I love getting to know people and kind of nurturing my relationships with them. And I think that that's definitely played a role in my creative work, the way that I like to work with people. It's definitely helped make me a really great networker. And it's definitely influenced the work that I do at the 3% conference as well.
Go a little bit deeper into the networking part and meeting people. How has that process helped you become better in making those connections?
Well, I think a lot of it is just about being empathetic and when you meet people, having a reason behind your desire to get to know them better. I found that that's been something that's really worked out well for me since, I'd say, since starting this creative career. I went to school for this. And one of the things that I found that when I was reaching out to people to get feedback on my portfolio, even as a student, or reaching out to recruiters or to people that worked at certain places that I didn't know, just that kind of first cold call, if you will, or the first cold reach out that you would do, really thinking about what it is about that person or their experience that you're interested in and being able to vocalize that to them really helped me start networking from the beginning. And I think it's also just a genuine love for people. I think that comes through when I try to connect with people, and it feels genuine. So it helps me connect because I want to. And I think that that's something that I've, shared with my students too when I was teaching. As I said, whenever you're reaching out to somebody, always try to make that personal connection. It's never like, what can they do for you? It's, hey, I'm reaching out to you because I looked at your portfolio and I'm so impressed with the way that you were able to capture this really unique design element in this one campaign that you did. I think that's so impressive. I'd love to talk to you about how you came up with that idea, or I'd love to, to kind of pick your brain about those sorts of things. Always coming at it with, an insight that you had from looking at their work, or something that you think in their background is interesting. Really making that personal connection when you reach out, having a reason that you're reaching out that's not just about, hey, can you get me a job? Or, hey, I'd love to work where you work. Can you hook me up with somebody that can make, that can get me an opportunity, really actually starting from the basic human connection element. And I think you're interesting. I think something that you brought to the table is really interesting here, and I'd like to connect with you about that. I think that that's a really great way to connect with other creative people, because we all want to feel like we're special. We all want to feel like we have a unique point of view. And I think anytime someone reaches out to me with a complimentary thing and they've noticed something that makes me different, and they're saying, hey, I think that's really cool, I'd love to talk to you about that. It's a really hard thing to turn down, and it's really, it encourages connection. So I think that's definitely helped me along the way, is having that kind of perspective and having that when I reach out to people.
Have there been times in your life where you felt as if you were different or a misfit?
I think we all as creatives feel that way a little bit. I think it's one of the reasons that we get into the business of being creative, because there is something that makes you tick a little differently. You see the world a little differently. So yeah, I've definitely felt that way in my life, many times. And I think even once I got into the industry, being a woman in the creative side, we are definitely outnumbered. And I think also once I got into more leadership roles, the numbers get even smaller. So I'd say that recently, or most fundamentally, the feeling of otherness that I've had has been in relation to my gender. And then, there's some deeper levels of that have to do with, my background and things like that. But I definitely feel like most of that comes from experience in being a woman in the creative field.
Who are 3 people who've had the greatest influence on shaping who you are right now?
I'm so lucky because, I have been working with the 3% conference for the last 2+ years, and that really opened up a whole new world to me. So I'd say definitely Kat Gordon has had an immense impact on my life. Just her support, the fact that she, brought me into the fold and gave me an opportunity to start conversations with people, and to be a part of a conversation that I felt like I was actually contributing to. That was really impactful for me, and has continued to be impactful for me. Kat's a great supporter of mine and a wonderful human being. I learn a lot from her. Nancy Vonk and Janet Keston, I believe they were also guests of yours at one point.
They were.
Also, yeah, they're wonderful. They've actually, interestingly enough, been very influential in my career since the beginning. I actually read their book in school, their first book, which is called Pick Me. It was all about breaking into advertising. And I remember reading that book and feeling like, wow, these women really get it. They care about people, and they were already very successful at that point, but their unique leadership style definitely came through in their writing for me. And even though I didn't know them personally then, I used that book and kind of that little bit of hope that I held on to from them in reading that book. And that book actually helped me a lot throughout my career. And then through through the 3% conference, I ended up getting to meet both of them personally. And they've both been very generous and helpful to me since we've met. And now I consider both of them mentors. So they've definitely been hugely influential, both through their writing and in person now. And then I'd say another person that's been hugely influential in my career or in shaping who I am right now is my husband. He's also a creative. We met in advertising school, but he's Turkish. He was an international student when we met, and he's very talented, but has a really different perspective than I do. We're very different people. I'm much more outgoing. He's much more introverted. But I think having his kind of support at home and support in my career has really helped me get through some tougher times in my career. And also it's helped me have the courage to become who I really am as a creative, because I know I always have that support network from a creative perspective, but also now that we're married, in my home life as well. And I think that's really important when you're striving for a career, to have that support wherever you need it.
Absolutely. How does having that work connection at home affect your dinner conversation, pillow talk, your, just conversation in general? How much of it is about work and, that perspective on industry? What impact do you see for good or ever ill in terms of your relationships?
Yeah. I actually think for us, it's been, I'd say very positive for the most part, because you can actually just jump into things and you have somebody that, intuitively understands some of the internal struggles that come with being a creative. They understand workplace dynamics. They understand when you're on a pitch and you have to work late, those sorts of things you don't even need to explain. There's not a basis of understanding that you need to, there's not somewhere that you need to start in explaining that. So I think that that's been really helpful, just because when I've been going through my more stressful times, he's already understood what I'm going through because he goes through it himself. And in terms of our pillow talk, we talk a lot about troubleshooting. So if we're having, issues around communications or with a particular, interpersonal relationship with a colleague or, challenges with a client, just being able to bounce that off of somebody that's outside your work situation. So it's a little more safe, but also somebody that really knows you and knows maybe some of the little things that you do that might be a little challenging for someone else. It's a very nice place to be, because you can have somebody that understands you and supports you, but it can also be like, okay, well, do you think it's possible that you maybe A, B, or C? Or there's a level of honesty there that's really important and really helpful in moving past those things. I think also just having someone to vent to is sometimes. So I think that's been really the most helpful part of having somebody as a partner who also has a similar, career. I think that's been super helpful that way. But to be honest, since we just had a baby, mostly we talk about our baby now. That's our biggest pillow talk conversation.
That's funny. Well, I asked because my wife Linda and I met working at a newspaper, ran a newspaper together for a while, and have continued to work a lot together. And similar to you, we have a lot of understanding, again, of the communications business, and we're often working on projects together, as we have for many, many years. And I always like to hear someone else's perspective when they're married to somebody who's also in the same field.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful.
Yeah, very much so. Let's go back a little bit more into your personal writing process. You were talking about the encouragement and help that you've had from Nancy and Janet. So talk about your writing process. Are you a morning pages writer? Did you keep a diary or a journal growing up? Do you still? What is your writing, thinking, creative process around that?
It's super interesting. I've gone through different cycles in my career. I think we get stuck sometimes on something that's working for you at a certain time in your life. Um, Growing up, I always loved to write. So I my mom likes to tell people that Laurel needs to write the way normal people need to breathe. And I think that was especially very true for me growing up. I was always writing poems or writing short stories or little vignettes as they would come into my head. It was something that just part of my process. I processed my life through writing it down. I kept a journal or a diary. I'm sure I have. My mom actually recently asked me if I could go clean out a box of stuff that she has in my old bedroom. And I think a lot of that stuff is journals. And I'm sure I have a lot of really embarrassing things in there about ex-boyfriends and, whatever teenage dramas I was working through at the time. But for me, going through the process of writing down my feelings, writing down things that I'm going through has been very important to me and very helpful as a life process, I'd say. And I think recently, I applied for a creative residency and had to go through the process of answering some pretty interpersonal type questions. And just going through the process of that again, I was surprised to remember, just how helpful that was. So for my actual working career, I think you get better at writing the more that you write. So I'm definitely try to write for fun or for pleasure, when I'm not writing copy. And that's something that I've really been trying to do more of in the last couple of years. It's also harder to do the busier you get, and the more senior you get, the more responsibilities you have. But I think that that's so important to the creative process, especially when you're working on deadline, when you're working on projects that maybe are a little more technical. Just writing for joy on the outside can really fuel that creative fire within you, and I think it definitely helps your writing become better on the whatever you're writing for. Whether it's a website or whether it's a campaign, those sorts of things. Just having the time where you can write about whatever you want. I think that's what keeps our creativity sparked when we're at work as well.
Yeah, it seems to me that creative people who are extremely self-aware, and they are so in their personal creative process, seem to be able to transfer that over in an empathetic way into their work as well, as they're either writing for or creating for other people. There seems to be that personal connection that happens, I think, because of that self-awareness in their creative work, at least in my experience.
I think that's really true. And I also think that that's something that really goes back to the diversity of thought and the reason that, one creative to the next, we're all really different, no matter what our backgrounds are, but it gets down to just the way that we think about things. And that's, I think, I am a very empathetic person because I process a lot of things through relationships. I focus a lot on relationships. That's just my natural inclination. And I feel like that comes through in my writing because that's just where my head is. But I feel like even if that's not you're not prone to do that, I think that going through the process of, writing in a different voice, putting yourself in the perspective of your consumer, putting yourself in a colleague's shoes, like those sorts of things, that process makes your writing more empathetic and it makes you a better colleague. I think that that's really important because we work in a very collaborative environment, and the ideas are better when we throw them, off each other, when we hear other perspectives, especially when they're different from us. I think that the work gets better.
Absolutely.
I think that we learn something, and I think that that's really important. So it's something that I that respectful understanding, always trying to make the space for other people and for their opinions and perspectives. It's so important in working relationships to have a positive experience at work, but it's also so important for the work itself.
Right. I want to step back a little bit as well. The process of becoming a mother, just by necessity of time, one thing, your priorities, I'm sure, have to change in some ways. But how has this process impacted your focus on what projects are most important to concentrate your attention on?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think every mother's different. So I can't say that across the board this would be somebody else's experience.
Of course.
But for me, I really feel like I've always known that I don't want to be a stay-at-home mother, but at the same time, I really value my time with my daughter and my time with her. I really want to be present and I really want to be happy. So for me as a creative person, I've just decided, to be pickier about the projects that I take on and the kind of roles that I take on and also the kind of people that I work with. Obviously, mental health is important. So, really respecting my team, being in a respectable work environment, those are table stakes for me now at this point in my career. It's just, there's just, I don't have the time to waste feeling bad about, my working experience. So I need to work with respectful, inspiring people. That's just a mandatory for me. But in terms of the actual work, I've definitely taken a step back from things being just about, making sure that I am getting, my proper hourly rate, which that's important. But I'm definitely more interested in work that I think is good. I think that work that does good, work that feels good. And I think I get a little bit of that from my work with the 3% conference, but I want to be focusing my energy on making the world a better place and working with people that are coming from a good place. So that's definitely what I think about when I'm considering a role, whether or not I'm inspired by the work itself and the people that I'm going to be working with.
What are some of the things you're starting to let go of now that you may have clung to earlier?
Title. There's a bit of ego there. And I think especially as a woman who's had to fight really hard to get, where I am and to, for validation, I think sometimes in a very male-dominated industry, that being that other, you don't get the same feedback. You don't necessarily get the same opportunities and you don't necessarily get the same kudos that other people have just because our industry isn't made for you. So I think that I was very focused on title and promotion and having some glory, I guess. Because I was I was a bit starved for that, I think, at different places in my career. And then, I wanted to set an example for other women. And I think now it's really about how I feel about my contribution. And I think a lot of that is just respect and also finding some peace in the fact that I know my value. And I think that if I'm working with the right people, they know my value too. So I think that I'm able to focus just on contributions and how I feel about what I'm doing and how I feel about what I'm contributing. I've also had to let go of a ton of travel, which is hard because I love traveling. It's always been one of those things that I really enjoyed. There's some kind of feeling of being like in demand or of being successful when I could hop on a plane and go make something happen in New York or, go attend a conference. I loved being so busy that I was bouncing from one thing to the next. And I've definitely had to embrace a slower paced life right now because I have a 5-month-old. So I think those two things really mostly.
Well, I found it's really easy to confuse activity with accomplishment.
Absolutely.
And I talk with a lot of people about processes, and I find when people are busy, it's not always doing things that really matter. And I catch myself, even though I am far more process aware than I used to be, I am constantly having to stop and think, am I working on something that's really moving towards something important, or just filling my time with, again, activity? So having a baby or certain life changes and seem to bring about that awareness in ways that others don't. So,
oh yeah, definitely.
What are some of the fears that you are struggling with right now? Where does fear or that anxiety show up in your life?
I think it's kind of interesting, but I think for me, I've always been able to push things through because I'm a pretty strong personality and I'm very clear about what I want. So I've always been able to make things happen. And I think since having my daughter, I've really shifted back into the focus being on my happiness as a creative. And I think that I have some anxieties about what that looks like because I don't think I've really done that before. And so it's a different process for me. It's a little bit slower. It's a little bit kinder to myself. And, it is, less ego. So I think just for me, there's a little bit of anxiety in the shift there, and also some anxiety in the lulls, because I am one of those people that thrives on, being busy, or at least I have in the past. I've really been a go, go, go type personality. And, now, my days are going fast, but it's because of a little person who's demanding of my time. And I think just really, having to slow down and still have myself go through the evaluation process of everything is hard, because sometimes I want to just leap into the whole, oh yeah, this contract sounds good. I'd get to do this, or I'd get to do this. And just being like, well, slow down. Like, let's go through the evaluation process. Is this good for you? Is this where you want to invest your heart? Does this work for your family? I think that anytime you're going through evaluating your process or evaluating the ways that you've handled things in the past, it can be scary. And I think that's, for me, there's some anxiety in the stillness, some anxiety in the slowdown, and also in just doing things differently, because part of for me, part of like my, where thinking about where I want to invest my heart and being happy is about, really looking at work opportunities that I think are going to be the most fulfilling. And some of those are things that are a little bit, newer to me. They're not work opportunities where I can step in and just be like a gung-ho leader and just, get into that autopilot where, oh, I know what I'm doing. So there's some scariness there for me too, in learning and in not being the know-it-all in the room.
Well, while we're a little bit on the topic of struggle, when we talked a couple of weeks ago, you were talking about some of the low points and some of the struggles that have happened in your career that you really moved through and had to grow through. What are some of those struggles, and what are some of the lessons that have come out of those times that you've taken forward, as well as you mentor and work with folks who are coming up in the business?
Well, I can think of 3 particular times in my career where I was really challenged. And a lot of times, like, you're coming up against ego, in the past anyway. But I'd say the first time was, fairly early on in my career, when we went through the economic downturn, and, in San Francisco, 2 out of every 3 creatives was out of a job. It was really dire here. I'm sure it was dire a lot of other places, but
Yes, it was.
this was my experience. So I found myself in a situation where I was having to compete with much more senior level creatives. Sometimes creative directors were, they had lost their jobs. They were trying to freelance. They were dropping their rates and being willing to take on, a copywriter role because they needed to pay their bills too. And I think that time in my life was very stressful because I had just kind of hit a nice little stride in my career. I had just started to feel like, pretty confident. I was, pretty junior, but I had worked, at the agency that I was working at for long enough to feel a little bit comfortable there. I was, I'd learned enough to feel like I wasn't the total newbie. I wasn't super junior. I was starting to get excited about the work that I was doing. And then to go from that to, oh, I don't have a job now. And how am I going to freelance? And how am I going to connect with people? I think that was really challenging for me. And honestly, out of necessity, I had to really push myself to do things I was uncomfortable with, because when you have rent due and you don't know how you're going to do it, you have to say yes to whatever freelance job you get, even if you don't know how to do it. And you have to make sure you have another freelance job coming in. So I really did things that didn't come super naturally to me at the time. I was very pushy with people. I would reach out to people a lot. I would follow up, very consistently. I worked on just connecting for connecting's sake with people. I would reach out and offer. I couldn't afford to buy somebody lunch, but I would offer to buy them a coffee and just pick their brain and see if there's anything that I could get out of that conversation with them that I could apply to potentially making a connection for later on, or, getting some sort of opportunity for a project. Anything I could do, I was doing it, and I was taking, I was cutting my rates way down. I was taking projects and working with people I'd never worked with before. I was figuring out how to do things. I was saying, oh yeah, you need me to do a white paper? Sure, I can do that. And then Googling, figuring out how to fake it. And I did so much of that, during that period of time, that I learned a lot, and it made me a much more comfortable creative because I was more comfortable with the unknown. I was more comfortable with doing things that felt a little alien to me. So by the time the economy rebounded, I had a huge breadth of experience, but more so than that, I also was less flappable. I felt more senior, I felt more confident in my abilities, and I had less ego. And I think that was really important for me to go through, because you come at things more humble, but also more experienced. And I find that combination makes for leadership. Another time in my career that I was really challenged is when I thought it would be a good idea to be a teacher. I thought I would be able to go into teaching at the Academy of Art. They asked me if I would teach a digital class, and digital is definitely my wheelhouse. I have a lot of experience writing in digital, concepting in digital. I understand platform really well. I'm good with strategy and the digital side of things. And I thought, oh yeah, this will be a piece of cake. I had gone through an advertising program myself, so I understood how the classes were set up. I thought it would be really fun. And I thought, I know how to do this. I can teach somebody else how to do this. I realized really quickly after, I think it was my second class, that, whoa, this is so not what I was expecting. Because when you get comfortable in kind of a role with your own working situation, you get confident to the point where you're like, oh, we're going to launch a website, or, oh, we're going to launch a landing page. Okay, we're going to start with this. We're going to start here. We're going to do this, this, this. You almost get into an autopilot mode because you've done it before. And because you've been doing it for a few years, you feel confident in your ability to keep doing it. But I realized when I was working with students who are obviously quite junior that they didn't have any of the foundation that I had. So I found myself having to take a step back and take a step back and take a step back and really examine my process and really explain to them why they would be doing something, or why I would be suggesting that they do something, or where they would start was so much further down the line than where I was starting. And I found that was such a great experience to go through, because it really made me question my own process and honestly question my own laziness sometimes.
Wow.
Like I had gotten into this habit where I felt, confident enough that I wasn't going through steps 1 through 3. I was just starting at step 4 because I had automatically knew that was going to be the step. And I think going through that made me better. It made me a better creative. It made me better thinking on my feet. It was a very surprising outcome. But yeah, teaching is tough. And I definitely felt like I learned definitely more from my students than I could have possibly taught them. And then I'd say probably another thing that I struggled with in my career, I think if you talk to any creative, we all have our struggle stories, our war stories. And I had a particular agency experience that was definitely challenging for me. I had a particularly toxic work environment situation that I was dealing with several years ago. And it was just one of those situations where I couldn't do anything right. And there, it was political. I think I'm a strong personality anyway. I was an easy target because I opened my mouth a lot. But, going through that was really heart-wrenching for me. It made me feel powerless. It made me feel not valued. And it made me question my capability and my self-worth a lot. And
right.
For anybody that does work in a creative environment, like you feel those things anyway on a somewhat day-to-day basis, but to have it magnified for me was just really, really rough. And, I ended up getting out of that situation, but I'd probably stayed a little bit too long. And by the time that I left, I realized, it had done some damage to my self-worth. I really think I just was shaken a bit. I wasn't as confident. I had a chip on my shoulder, and I think realizing that was the case, I had to make a decision. I really needed to turn that around fast because I just couldn't let that spiral anymore. I had let it spiral enough. I felt like I deserved better. I needed to, pick up, learn from what I could from the situation and just move on, because I knew some of it, like a lot of it, wasn't really about me. So my biggest learning thing there was, the first thing I did was think about, and I've said this a couple times before, think about where I wanted to invest my heart. And that point, the only positive experience that I had that year was attending the 3% conference. So I reached out to Kat Gordon and said, hey, I am going to have some time. I'm freelance. I'd love to help you with the 3% conference. And at the time, I just assumed maybe I would work a booth for her, or maybe she would have me help with copy on a flyer or something like that. But it ended up being this opportunity where Kat invited me to be a part of her team, invited me to be a speaker at the conference, and we kind of went from there. But that for me was such an important lesson and such a positive outcome that I just, share that with all my friends who go through this. If you're ever going through a challenge, an interpersonal challenge at work where you're not feeling valued, where you're feeling picked on or not heard, or you keep on getting opportunity, you're being passed over for opportunities that you feel like you deserve. Anytime you're in a situation where you're not feeling valued, you need to find a place where you are. And maybe you can't leave that job right away, but maybe you can volunteer, or maybe you can find a freelance project that can kind of prop up your self-worth. And I think doing that internal reflection and realizing how important it is to feel good about what you're doing, that's just so important. You need to have that as a creative. You can't let others just define your self-worth. You have to believe in yourself. And if you're not in a working situation where that's happening for you, you need to find an outlet where you can find that again. It's hard enough being a creative person. No one has your perspective. You're very unique in this industry. Everyone's unique. No one's exactly like somebody else. So you need to do what you can to find the positive working environment so that you can keep growing and keep being a positive person. No negative working environment is worth your career. Just not.
Wow. Well, you've opened up several gold mines that I'd like to dig into, but apparently Kat Gordon recognized a great talent and contribution. So I want to go back a little there, because when we talked, you were telling me a little bit more about how the Next Creative Leaders panel came to fruition, as well as some of the fruit that's come out of it in terms of both industry impact and for building relationships and business connections. So go back into that a little bit, since it was with the 3%, and because that came about pretty quickly, and I mean, you took great initiative there and some great things moved. So yeah, open that up a little bit.
So I actually run social media for 3%. So I'm on Twitter nonstop. I am paying attention to what other organizations are doing around diversity, seeing what we can support. I'm retweeting things. I'm having conversations with other people that are also tweeting about diversity. And one of the things that I noticed when I was on Twitter is I noticed that the One Club, which is a wonderful and very prestigious organization in New York that's focused on advertising and design. They have an award show. They do Creative Week, which is a great week of programming for creatives. I noticed that they were investing in a lot of diversity programming that was really, really special. And I also noticed that they seemed to be a little challenged when it came to gender diversity. I noticed this because Cindy Gallup was, tweeting about them a fair amount. She's kind of our watchdog. She calls people out when they're missing the mark around diversity. So, I had noticed those two things, and I reached out to them through Twitter and said, hey, I'm going to be in New York in a couple weeks. I'd love to talk to you and see if maybe there's some way that we can work together. I feel like there's an opportunity here. And David Jackson, who is amazing, he's my personal ambassador, a very dear friend now, thanks to Next Creative Leaders. He is the one that's runs social media for One Club. And he said, yeah, let's get lunch. So we got together and we had a lunch in New York City and talked a lot about where we saw our organizations going. And, as people that are focused on supporting diversity, we're thinking a lot about the future, and we're very hopeful for a more diverse future. And so, one club is focused a lot on the creative output. They're putting very prestigious awards on the best creative that's coming out of our industry. And as 3%ers, we are a community of very driven women who are leading the industry. So we thought, well, there's an interesting thing. We're focused on the future. What does the future look like? It's going to be more diverse, which means there's going to be more women leaders. And who are these women that are coming up the ranks? Let's find them. And that's where the idea of Next Creative Leaders came from. And we decided to work together, to get our organizations to work together, to reach out to our communities and identify women that we thought would be the future of creativity. So these are women that are doing award-winning work. They're women that are giving back to their communities. They're women that, maybe just coming into their creative role, creative leadership roles, maybe associate creative directors, maybe senior creatives, maybe even more junior creatives who are showing leadership capabilities through, teaching classes and, running, helping portfolio students get their books together, these sorts of things. We wanted to showcase these women because they weren't, being showcased, and we wanted people to know what to look for in the future. Like, hey, these are the women to hire. These are the women that are going to be running your creative organizations in the future. So that's what Next Creative Leaders was about. And we actually put this whole thing together in about 6 weeks flat, which is crazy. And we were able to launch Next Creative Leaders the first day of Creative Week in 2015. It was very well received. It was a very positive experience for all. There's a lot of buzz around it. People were very excited about the women that we profiled. The women were very excited. Their companies were very proud and very excited. And there was a lot of positive momentum around it. So we ended up inviting some of those women to speak at 3%. And the way that we kind of positioned it was a way for agencies to get the insider info on what it takes to recruit, retain, and promote the top female talent in the industry.
I'll put a link in the show notes so that people can go to watch it. But I ended up watching it, I know twice and parts of it 3 times because it was so engaging. You and David did a great job of facilitating that.
Thanks.
Are there times that you find yourself dealing with perfectionism as you drive for excellence in things? Where does perfectionism ever creep in to your work?
For me, I think it's really more an aspirational thing. I had to let go of my inner grammar Nazi quite early on in my career because copywriting is not an exact science, and you need to write the way people talk, and people this day and age don't speak, they don't speak perfectly. So it's really more about the art of the conversation. So I think for me, the idea of perfectionism is more about consistently delivering work that's interesting and engaging and high quality. And for me, since I am so tuned into what the industry is doing, I'm oftentimes looking at what other people are delivering and thinking about, okay, well, this is getting a lot of buzz. This campaign's getting a lot of buzz. This is a really smart idea. I'm looking at where the buzz is, and there's a bit of that wanting to raise the bar, wanting to be at the level of the people that are that are doing the buzzworthy work. So for me, I think that that's where the idea of perfection comes in. It's really about impact and being recognized by the industry. And since I work in the digital field, it's a different thing. It's a different beast than advertising. People aren't giving you like a gold star for every website that you launch, or a gold, or an award for every app that you design. It's just different. It's not as congratulatory of a role. So I think for me, that the perfectionism is more in my head, and the fact that I'm constantly looking to be inspired by the cream of the crop and aspiring to be just as good myself, even if it means something different, because what I'm delivering is not a commercial that could be winning at Cannes.
Absolutely. What are some words of advice that you would have to offer to people who are coming into the profession to get them on the right track for their success?
I think it's really important. Well, two things. I think the two things that I would say is, the first thing is relationships are everything in this business. I always said this to my students, and I'm reminded of this daily in my own work. You have to be good enough, but you have to be a good person. That's fundamental. You can be good enough at what you do, and if you're a good person, people are going to want to work with you. If you're really talented and you're a jerk, that's going to be problematic for you. You might find places that are willing to put up with you a little bit when you're doing that. But at the end of the day, people that have worked with you are just going to say, it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. So be a good person. Put yourself out there for other people. Return favors. Stay late to help a colleague out. If they're struggling, stay late. If you have the opportunity to give back to someone, do it. I mean, this is an industry where it's so hard enough on its own. It's, you're dealing with rejection all the time. It's very competitive. Just be a kind person. I think that's the biggest piece of advice I'd have to offer, because your relationships are everything. It's the reason that you're going to get, maybe luck is the reason that you get your first job, but the reason you get your second job is going to be relationships. And every single job you get after that is going to be relationships. And relationships are the reason that you leave a place, and it's the reason that you stay somewhere. It's even more important than the work. It's all about the relationships that you have. So be good to your relationships, build them actively, take care of people, and remember that it doesn't cost anything to be kind. There's no need to be a jerk. Even if you're the most senior person in the company, even if you're the CEO, you don't need to be a jerk. And also, especially in this industry, you never know. All it takes is a string of awards, one campaign, and the person that was your intern that you were mean to, your last job, is suddenly, the senior creative hire somewhere that you want to work. So just always be nice. Doesn't cost anything. And the other thing that I would say, this is especially important to people that are starting out, but it matters throughout your career too, is just own your voice, have an opinion, know what you feel is good, and know what you feel like you bring to the table. I remember hearing this or reading this somewhere when I was a student, that said, when you're interviewing, know what your favorite piece of work is in your portfolio. And if a company doesn't like, the piece in your portfolio that you love the most, don't take it personally. That's not the place for you. And it's so funny. It's a simple thought, but it's actually so true, because you're not going to fit in everywhere. Like, as a creative, you're very individualistic, and you're bringing something specific to the table, but don't waste your energy somewhere where they don't get what makes you special. It's just not worth it, because for every place that doesn't think you're a good fit, there's going to be some place that does. And the more clear you are about the work that you want to do, the kind of work that you're good at, the kind of work that you want to be doing, the more clear that's going to come across to the right place. Wow.
That's golden. That's great. That's news you can use. So, Laurel, what do you want to be remembered for?
That's a good question. I want to be remembered as a talented storyteller. And I also want to be on the right side of history, which is a funny thing to say, I guess, now as we're, entering the cycle of, the presidential race and everything. But it's a big reason that I'm working with the 3% conference. I think that we are working towards a future that is better for everyone. And that's why, I get up every day. That's why I, work on things like the Next Creative Leaders. It's why I work with Kat Gordon. It's why I take on, opportunities to help out other women that are coming up the ladder. It's why I, do student book reviews. It's because I care about the future of creativity and the people that are going to be a part of it. And I want to be remembered as one of the people who helped make the future better. Even if it's just for one person. I think if it's a student that remembers that I, connected them with someone, or, it's one of the next creative leaders that remembers that I was the person that helped them have their first big accolade that got them, picked for something else, then I'm on the right side of history there, because I'm helping create the kind of industry that I wished I had when I was more junior. And I think that that's all anyone can hope for. I want to see the work get better. I want to see the work have more meaning and more impact on the world, because as storytellers and as designers and as creative people, we're putting messages out into the world that people consume every day. And that's a really powerful responsibility to have. And I think the better we are as an industry, the better those messages are going to be, and the more positive impact we can have on the world. So I'd just like to be remembered as being on the right side of that.
So is there someone that who is outside the spotlight but doing something important that's having an impact that the world should know about?
Yeah, this is funny. I had that same question for our next creative leaders on our panel in New York, and they all had great junior women in their that they had their sights set on. My person is actually no longer technically in the creative field, though she's still working in a creative capacity. And I was lucky enough to learn from her, both in the classroom. She was a student of mine when I was teaching at the Academy of Art University, and also learn from her in the workplace. She was my intern at my last agency job. Her name's Regina Garcia, and she actually voiced the Next Creative Leaders video that we played at the conference. She's amazing. She's an entrepreneur who has followed her heart, and she and her sister just launched a superfood chocolate line that's all about having a good life. And I think that their company is called Live a Lot, and they just launched, and they created chocolate that is full of good things, so you can feel good about eating it. It supports like well-being in a lot of different ways. And, just as
if you need to feel better about eating chocolate.
Well, it's supposed to be like chocolate you don't have to feel guilty about. But
that's great.
Anyway, they launched this line, and I just think it's so interesting, and also such a great example of following your heart and providing something that's needed out there. And I'm just so proud of her. I mean, she's managing the brand, so she's still doing creative work in that capacity. But, just to support a small business, to support two female entrepreneurs in this world, like, I think what they're doing is great, and their chocolate is amazing. So their company is called Live a Lot, and they're based in San Francisco, but you can order online.
Man, that's great. I hope they get 1 million orders.
Me too.
Well, as we wrap up, is there one thought that you'd like to leave with the listeners that you believe can make a difference in their lives?
I've been thinking a lot about bias lately because I think that bias is something that can go very unnoticed in our lives, especially those of us that are more senior. We get stuck in our ways and we have the opinions that we have. But I'd say that anytime you can take a look at the judgments that you have about the people that you're working with or people that you want to hire, or the judgments you have about work and why it's good, even the way that you judge your own work and why you think it's good. I think anytime you can question that process and question your own biases that may be there, you'll be better for it. And I think it's a really hard thing to do, but I think that that's a process that I'm working on. Even somebody that works in diversity who's been trained in this, it's hard not to be who we are. But I think being able to take a step back and try to be honest about where our brains go when we're on autopilot, I think that it can be really impactful if you question that. I think that you might see that you are shutting out people or a new process, or maybe even judging yourself too harshly, which I think if you can look at that, just open yourself up a little bit, I think you'll be better creative for it and a better person too.
Wow. Thank you. I appreciate your time. This is the reason why I love having these conversations. You've just made a huge impact of encouragement on my day.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Till soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Creator's Journey. If you enjoyed our theme music, the name of the song is You've Got a Home by Krista Wells. The Creator's Journey is published the first and third Sundays of each month, except for July and December. If you enjoyed the show, I would appreciate having you go to iTunes and subscribe. While you're there, if you give us a favorable rating and review, it'll make a huge difference in helping a newcomer easily find it. You can find links to today's guests, the people and books we talked about, and email me with your wonderful thoughts, all at thecreatorsjourney.com. I want to thank Yodelist for sponsoring this episode of The Creator's Journey. Yodelist is an interactive marketing platform for people in the creative world. With a vetted database of contacts from across the industry, Yodelist helps photographers, illustrators, creative directors, designers, producers, stylists, and many others to locate potential clients and gives them the tools to make those connections happen. If you want to find out how Yodelist helps creative people find one another for work, just go to yodelist.com. Today's podcast is also brought to you by audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/TCJ. There are over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Here's a short excerpt from the audiobook Control-Alt-Delete, both written and read by my guest on the next episode, Mitch Joel. Enjoy.
Brands have to get over themselves. The majority of apps are failing because they add no value to the smartphone user. There is no utility. The apps are self-centered catalogs, nothing more than a showcase for products and services. There's a bigger picture and a bigger story here. If 1 in 4 branded apps aren't used again after being downloaded and 26% of branded apps aren't used more than once, I'm here to promise you that 100% of consumers use, keep, and talk about the branded apps that provide true value to them and their lives.